This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
للمرة الأولى منذ عقود يكون للبنان قانون انتخابات قبل موعد التصويت.
For the first time in decades, Lebanon has agreed on an election law months before the date set for the elections. This is true. The new election law was one of the issues that the rival parties had agreed on in the Doha Agreement. This again is true. But this law, known as the 60s law, seems to be a cause of concern for many circles, since implementing it 5 decades ago was one of the reasons behind the civil war in the mid-70s.
منتصف السبعينيات.
عود على بدء في كل مرة يتحضر فيها لبنان لاستقبال موسم جديد من الانتخابات.
Back to the same. Every time Lebanon prepares to welcome a new season of parliamentary elections, the Lebanese people wait for a new draft of the election law. But the difficult work that took place behind closed doors in the House of Parliament and on the streets did not result in anything new or worth mentioning. The Electoral Act of 1960 remained the same, with small amendments that will be implemented in the parliament elections in the spring of next year. A lengthy parliament session preceded passing the new old law in Lebanon. The election law mandated the redrawing of electoral districts, which corresponds to the Doha Agreement of last May. It had also called on the judiciary to form an electoral district per the law of the year 1960. Based on the Doha Agreement, the law passed some reform amendments suggested by the National Commissioner under its former president, Fuad Boutros. With that, the upcoming elections will take place one day in all the ministries, after occurring over 4 consecutive Sundays in the past. The law also defined the principles for media and press coverage of the election campaigns and placed limitations on candidate spending. This will be supervised by a special commission in the hope of curbing lobbying money. This election law, however, did not include fundamental reforms, especially the one that allows Lebanese exiles to vote, which was supposed to be implemented in 2013. The election law also did not include the amendment that lowers the voting age to 18 instead of 21. More importantly, the election law did not call for allocating a specific number of seats in the parliament for women.
The legal age is 18, but the voting age is 21. There's a contradiction here. Do people become adults at 18 or 21? I think that 18-year-olds can understand what's going on in their homeland. Most of the people I've seen demonstrating in the streets were around that age.
The parliament does not only represent people older than 18 years of age, it represents all of the Lebanese.
We vote for the person that we believe in. We do not vote for the candidate that our parents like. This is why we would like to vote.
A
copy of the amended law generated strong criticism from many Lebanese people. Some believe the political elite in Lebanon did not amend the law because they wanted to maintain their seats in parliament. This further increases sectarian resentment among Lebanese citizens who still have a sectarian system of voting, rather than voting for candidates based on their political platforms. In addition, there is a clear marginalization of the Lebanese youth, despite the fact that they are the only ones who potentially can revive the political life in the country. It seems that prominent Lebanese leaders leave their parliamentary seats only to come back when election laws are changed. Nevin Afuni, Arabiya.
دفعت الأزمة الغذائية في أفغانستان كثيرا من الأهالي والتجار إلى استغلال أطفال قُصّر.
The food crisis in Afghanistan drove many families and merchants to use underage children to smuggle food on their backs from Pakistan. The children crossed mountains and valleys while carrying bags of food products in exchange for low wages.
Back and forth, they climb these great mountains with their small feet. Going up and coming down, they are weighed heavily by their loads. These are the children of Afghanistan smuggling bags of flour from Pakistan. At an age when they should be busy studying, the innocence of childhood finds itself struggling to live and taking on responsibility before its time. The children jog to deliver the merchandise, repeating the process several times before sunset. Meanwhile, Masood runs out of breath and tells his story. He says that, like others his age, he has devoted his childhood to smuggling about 20 kilograms of flour on his back to help his parents support his 9 siblings. In addition to the rugged mountains and heavy loads, other difficulties face these children.
The police arrested us and beat us up. They confiscated our flour, but I didn't stop smuggling flour.
Most of these children have never gone to school, while circumstances forced others to throw away their pencils and smuggle food across the border instead. Only a few of the children said they combine education and smuggling flour the remainder of the day. The feet of some of these children were not strong enough for the difficult terrain and the heavy loads. However, dying while persevering is more honorable than dying of hunger inside their homes. Everyone says that a number of children were killed by slipping on the edges of the large mountains or by car accidents.
An exhausted child rested under a parked semi-truck, but he was killed because the driver did not know that there was a child underneath his truck.
With the approaching winter and the rising cost of flour, Afghanistan faces one of the worst waves of food shortages in many years. The situation became harder with the new restrictions that Pakistan placed on importing flour to Afghanistan. This led to taking advantage of children between 5 and 13 years old to smuggle food. Mohammed Rashad, Al Jazeera, Kabul.
The Idlib province welcomed many Turkish families on the occasion of the joyous Fitr Eid.
The visits of Turkish families to their neighbors are an opportunity to strengthen social and economic relations.
تعبيرا عن حبهم وسعادتهم بلقاء أهلهم وأقربائهم تجتهد العائلات والسيدات
Expressing love and joy of reuniting with families and relatives, the families and women of Idlib province prepare many kinds of food and drinks to offer their Turkish guests who came to wish them a happy Eid. Their foods are similar to what is prepared here in Idlib province.
التي تعد هنا في محافظة إدلب.
We are from the Tafar Tahari. We welcome our guests from Turkey and are very happy with this meeting. We celebrated a lot and prepared all kinds of food.
كما يجتهد الشباب والصبايا في انتقاء
Young women and men work hard to choose the best clothes and make up their hair. Perchance luck is on their side and the visit provides them with the opportunity to meet their other half.
I want to get married. Now everything's ready. My mother is here too, so we look and see.
Why not? If he's good, then why not?
Successful visits and meetings might bring prosperity, at least socially and economically.
American soldiers have teamed up with Egyptian troops in Sinai over the past few weeks for an operation designed to uncover Palestinians' weapon smuggling tunnels under the Philadelphia route into Gaza. The joint U.S.-Egyptian operation was arranged 6 months ago during Defense Minister Ehud Barak's visit to Egypt. The American soldiers, dressed in civilian clothes so as to be inconspicuous, are using state-of-the-art sonar technology to identify the tunnels. They have uncovered an unprecedented 42 tunnels in less than a month. Reportedly, the success of the latest operation has Hamas worried and has led to increased tension between Gaza and Egypt. The United States has agreed to sell Israel 25 of the most advanced aircraft in the world, the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter aircraft, at a cost of some $15 billion. An Israeli embassy spokesman called the deal further proof of the country's special relationship, since Israel is the first country outside NATO to receive the aircraft. The F-35 can fly large distances without refueling and has the capacity to evade radar detection. What's of concern here in Israel is that the planes will only be in service in the year 2014. Security experts are worried that it might be too late to use the aircraft in a possible strike against Iran's nuclear weapons facilities, which are expected to reach completion within the next 2 years. There's been a surge of anti-Semitism in the United States in the wake of the financial crisis. This according to the Anti-Defamation League, which issued a report on the matter late Thursday. ADL National Director Abe Foxman says that the internet is rife with a new wave of poisonous anti-Jewish rhetoric tied to the ongoing financial calamity. Whenever there's trouble or uncertainty in the economy or world events, says Foxman, Jews become the scapegoats. The report says that in addition to the blogs and other posts on the internet, some are also posting videos to sites like YouTube, claiming that the Jews are, quote, exploiting the current economic crisis as part of a great conspiracy to control the country and to harm non-Jews.
In
the Palestinian society, whose sons are shaped by tragedies, women continue to present an optimistic vision. Palestinian women who lost their spouses to death or Israeli prisons are forced to take jobs just like men. Despite the difficulties they have been facing and the little salaries they get, defiance can still be seen clearly on their faces. We leave you with Abdul Latif Al-Omari.
What can women do if their spouses are lost to death or Israeli prisons? Or what can they do if their spouses' salaries are not enough to sustain the family? Palestinian women have a practical answer to these questions. They accept the challenge no matter what happens. However, Palestinian men are facing difficulties to make a decent living, so one can only imagine how hard it is for women to take on jobs and abandon their traditional role of housewives.
Thank God I have confidence in myself. I want to make a living so I can survive. If I were to sit at home, who's going to feed me? Nowadays, no one helps anyone.
This reality has forced even women with university degrees to accept the hard living conditions in the West Bank.
I'm forced to work here for long hours for low wages. There are no labor laws that protect women who work in clothing stores or as secretaries in offices.
The fact that hundreds of women now have to work has changed the traditional role of women in this Eastern society. According to the World Bank, most Palestinians make no more than $2 a day. How are they going to provide for their families, and how are they going to send their sons to universities?
Due to the economic conditions in Jenin and the Israeli-imposed siege there, I was forced to find a job. My father is old, and he sells vegetables.
The living conditions of women under the occupation are very clear. Sadness and pain can be seen on the faces of Palestinian women. They are forced to change their lifestyle and take jobs that they otherwise would not take.
فرض قوانين الشريعة الإسلامية في جنوب الصومال هذا ما
The Mujahideen of southern Somalia decided to implement Sharia law in the border city of Sawalik near Kenya. They appointed a 12-member council to find ways to implement Sharia law in the city that became the home of tens of thousands of refugees fleeing the battles in the Somali capital of Mogadishu.
Foreign Minister Manouchehr Mottaki said in New York that U.S. thinkers should correct incorrect policies and illogical behavior of official Washington. The Iranian top diplomat told Asian-born and U.S. thinkers that the international community is facing many fundamental challenges because of double standards of major powers. On Iran's nuclear plan, Mottaki said every time Iran's full answers to IAEA questions have made the two sides closer to a final agreement. The U.S. has popped up there to bar a fair and logical settlement. He said the UN Nuclear Agency or the international community is not the problem, but the routine pretexts of the White House is the sticking point.
Parliament members representing the Iraqi Accordance Front distributed financial grants that were allocated by Parliament members for the displaced Iraqi families in Al Fahama area in northern Baghdad. This step was taken in an attempt to ease the suffering of displaced Iraqi families who did not receive aid from the Ministry of Immigration and Refugees.
The visits by the representatives of the Iraqi Accordance Fronts were intended to inform them about the situation of the displaced Iraqi families and their living conditions. Parliament member Azhar Samarai, who represents the Iraqi Accordance Fronts at the Parliament, visited Al Fahma area in northern Baghdad. Samarai gave financial support to 182 displaced Iraqi families who did not receive help from the Ministry of Immigration and Refugees. The families expressed their gratitude for the unique efforts of Samarai.
We thank Al-Samati for her efforts. She sympathizes with the suffering of the displaced Iraqi families and vulnerable people. Not all people can relate to the displaced Iraqis and those in need.
The residents of Fahama suffer from many problems, some of which were talked about during Samarai's visit. These problems include the lack of basic services such as power outages, which last many long hours. Other problems include the accumulation of garbage and dirty water in streets, not to mention the high unemployment rate.
The area of Al Fahama and Al Athmiya is in a miserable condition. There are no services and the schools and streets are in bad condition. We have problems with the garbage and other issues. The area is in bad condition in general, not to mention the power outages. I can't say that we do not receive electricity, but we are probably getting 2% of what we need.
As-Samarai promised to follow up with residents regarding their situation and pertaining to issues related to public services and education with proper ministers. She also promised to pay more attention to the plight of the displaced Iraqis as a member of the Immigration and Refugees Committee in the Parliament.
During our visit at Al-Rashidiyya and Al-Fahama areas and other areas outside Baghdad, we saw with our own eyes that the streets were in very bad condition. If this is the situation during the summer, one can only imagine what happens during the winter. We also noticed that the health services are poor and there are problems in schools. The schools are in very bad condition and they are not sufficient to accommodate the needs of Iraqi students. We expected to see the new Iraq, but we realized that the reality is something else. Schools are in poor condition and the teachers were complaining about transportation problems. Most teachers come from outside Al-Fahama, despite the fact that this area has many qualified individuals. We will present all these observations to the ministers.
The main objective of the ongoing visits by the Iraqi Accordance Fronts is to learn about the living conditions of Iraqi citizens and work on improving them in all possible ways. This shows that the Iraqi Accordance Fronts has a responsible policy towards humanitarian issues, which is evident by the insistence of its representatives to inspect the situation on the ground.
The Islamic community in New York welcomed the Blessed Eid feast with traditions and in a special atmosphere. More with Samir Shabana.
The Fitr Feast in the United States has its own unique characteristics that are connected to the situation of immigrants and their lives. New York wore a garment of religious purity when its large mosque awakened the hearts of its worshippers. The Eid sermon began with giving thanks, praising the greatness of God, and focusing on the greater symbolism and purpose of this occasion. The Imam prayed for the victory of the Palestinian people and for removing the ghost of war from Iraq.
I pray that this year's Eid brings blessings and goodness to all the faithful, and that our fasting is accepted by God.
My mother is Algerian and my father is Moroccan, and I greet all the Algerian people from the bottom of my heart.
Praise God. Eid brings back the same happy feelings. It's the same thing.
This feast was an occasion to reunite Muslim Algerian families and for their members to meet in an atmosphere of reverence and remembrance.
The sweets we prepare are usually the sweets of the Levant.
Eid is the most important occasion that brings together members of the Muslim and Arab communities who live far from their homelands.
On these occasions, the most important thing is to share joy with one's family and relatives.
You could say that the Algerian community here is close-knit. They work together.
I am very happy this Eid, and the first thing I want to do is to wish my mother and the Algerian nation a good feast. I have some relatives I have not seen for a long time.
Even though they are far away, they remain committed to the traditions and norms of their beloved homeland Algeria, especially on these religious occasions. We ask God that this happy Eid returns peace and security, peace and prosperity to our beloved Algeria. A happy Eid and many, many, many happy returns. Samir Shabana, Algerian TV, New York.
New York.
One of the main focus points of the U.S. vice presidential debate was energy, but the prospect of new offshore oil wells has seen some contentious debate in Alaska, the state where Sarah Palin is, of course, governor. Avi Lewis reports from the town of Barrow.
Barrow, the northernmost town in the United States. Patrolled by polar bears, it's an isolated settlement on the freezing shores of the Arctic Ocean. It's the main town on the North Slope, an oil-rich area the size of the United Kingdom, but only 7,000 people live here, and 70% of them are native Inupiat. This weekend, the fall whale hunt begins. It's been going on for more than 1,500 years, but it's not just a ritual. In a remote town where a carton of orange juice costs $11, the hunt is a major source of food. In the last few weeks, the state of Alaska and its governor, Sarah Palin, have been in the global spotlight, but the issues facing native people here have been invisible. Here in Barrow, the most contentious issue is not the faraway financial crisis, but the one on which Sarah Palin has staked her entire political career, offshore oil drilling. Former Mayor George Amawak is also a whaling captain.
And if there is a massive oil activity, especially exploration, seismic, and exploratory drilling, you might as well at least forget about whaling because they're going to impact them. There's no doubt.
I'm not for offshore drilling. I think it endangers the animals out there that we hunt for, and I'd rather keep them safe than drilling for more oil when they're getting it on land already.
There's thought to be 26.6 billion barrels of crude oil off these shores. Until last week, there was a federal ban on drilling. Now, with energy self-sufficiency and election mantra, the ban has been allowed to lapse.
Even before Hoytman came, even before money came, we had our ocean. For many centuries, our people survived off the ocean.
If, or rather when, the oil companies do drill, it's unlikely much of the revenue or many of the jobs will go to the people here. Big Oil directly employs 1,741 workers on the North Slope. Only 4 of them live in Barrow.
It's going to be a tough winter for the Eskimos that are up here, dependent on these marine mammals.
Of that, there's no debate. Avi Lewis, Al Jazeera, Barrow, Alaska.
Everyone is buzzing about the vice presidential debate. Neither candidate seemed to have their Middle East facts straight. Who knew what, and are they ready to lead? Answers to these questions and more on Link TV's Mosaic Intelligence Report.
I have to give credit where credit is due. Last night, Sarah Palin managed to say Ahmadinejad 3 times without stumbling or stuttering like her partner John McCain did when he debated Barack Obama.
Now here is Ahmadinejad.
And yes, I know she confused McClellan for David McKiernan.
Could work in Afghanistan. McClellan didn't say anything opposite.
When referring to the commanding general in Afghanistan. But when it came to the Middle East, both candidates forgot to bring their Middle East 101 manuals to the podium with them. Now here is a gotcha opportunity that Palin missed out on had she had the manual on hand. This is what foreign policy expert Senator Biden had to say when talking about Lebanon.
When we kicked, along with France, we kicked Hezbollah out of Lebanon. I said and Barack said, move NATO forces in there, fill the vacuum, because if you don't, Hezbollah will control it. Now what's happened? Hezbollah is a legitimate part of the government in the country immediately to the north of Israel.
What Palin could have said was, excuse my naivete, Senator, but Hezbollah has always been a legitimate part of the Lebanese government. They have several representatives in it. Also, it was the Syrians who were kicked out of Lebanon, not Hezbollah. But she didn't. She had forgotten to bring her Middle East 101 manual. This is the message Biden sent last night to the entire Arab world. Democratically held elections are a bad thing, especially if the party the United States does not approve of wins. Biden said,
here's what the president said when we said no. He insisted on elections on the West Bank when I said and others said and Barack Obama said, big mistake. Hamas will win, you legitimize them. What happened? Hamas won.
There was a confusing moment when Biden twice repeated that we spend more money
in 3 weeks on combat in Iraq than we spent on the entirety of the last 7 years that we have been in Afghanistan building that country. Let me say it again.
The fact of the matter is nearly $88 billion were spent on Afghanistan since 9/11, according to a report by the Congressional Research Service. He also neglected to mention that, unlike in Iraq, the EU and NATO countries have pitched in both militarily and in reconstruction efforts. And yes, the surge. Do you remember 4 years ago? It was the Iraqi elections and how wonderful things are going to be for everyone in Iraq. No one mentions this anymore. Both candidates raised concerns over Iran and Pakistan's nuclear programs. However, neither mentioned Israel's or India's nuclear weapons, as if this had no impact on neighboring countries in the region. There was one thing both candidates did not require a Middle East 101 manual for.
Israel is our strongest and best ally in the Middle East.
No one in the United States Senate has been a better friend to Israel than Joe Biden.
They both delivered the perfect Israel love fest moment when Sarah Palin told Joe Biden,
I'm so encouraged to know that we both love Israel, and I think that is a good thing to get to agree on.
She also repeated a line that we often hear from candidates, something that has never happened, the idea of moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. I'm Jamal Dajani for the Mosaic Intelligence Report. To learn more about this program or to share your thoughts, visit us at linktv.org/mosaic.
Get more news about the Middle East online at linktv.org/mosaic. The Mosaic webpage offers a complete archive of Mosaic programs, program transcripts, the Mosaic video podcast, and the Mosaic Intelligence Report, a weekly analysis of the hottest stories from the Middle East. The views expressed on Mosaic are those of the participating broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible with the support of viewers like you. Thank you. This program was brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. television network devoted to global and national news, with uncompromising documentaries and diverse cultural programs. Programs which connect you to the world.